What's going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Xavier Pierce, Geek Archivist. Rest in peace, Val Kilmer, Bill Paxton, as well as Sam Elliott. But I suspect that most of the actors that were in this film Tombstone are no longer with us. So for arguably a good chunk of the cast, may they rest in peace. But I will admit this was my first time watching it entirely, not just clips. I do recall bits of the opening scene, though not that well. I did recall watching bits of it when it was airing on TV. Again, I didn't watch the whole thing. But after seeing it from beginning to end, there's a lot of good parts in this film that I really enjoyed. So, for example, like right at the point where Wyatt Earp, played by Kurt Russell, he goes to this one particular saloon when the mayor mentions that out of all of them, this one in particular has been like lacking in a sense. I don't quite remember the exact words because this is my first time watching it, but he goes inside and finds this one particular ruffian. And what I like though is the fact that later on, I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead. There's a particular line that that Wyatt Earp tells this clown, even though the guy's young, but he's talking smack. And then there's this point where he goes around the 2038 line, 2038 point of the film. He tells that ruffian, "Go ahead, skin it. Skin that smoke wagon and see what happens." What is pretty clear is that, like, with some of the, you could say, the lingo or the slang, some parts of it did make sense to me in terms of like what it actually means. So that line that I just read, again, 2038 mark, where he's telling that guy before, Wyatt Earp like drags him and, throws him out of the saloon. What was clear to me is that he was telling him, "Go ahead." When he said "skin it," he's like, pull, like, "I dare you try to pull out your gun and shoot me, though, and see what happens." But when he said the word "skin that smoke wagon," it's clear to me. He said, "Go ahead and shoot your gun and let's see what happens." It's his way of saying, you think you're so tough and all of that with that gun of yours? I can tell you right now, I'm a lot tougher. But when it gets to the point of Wyatt Earp seeing Doc Holliday, and Doc Holliday, refers to the guy that got kicked out by Wyatt Earp, an old madcap. By the time the guy learns that the one he was being rude to was Wyatt Earp, he's like, "Oh, shoot." Like, he knew that he messed up really bad. It's clear, like, the guy knows that that man has a reputation, like a really good reputation. But anyway, there's one part that I like because you can sort of see the friendship between those two, is that after Wyatt Earp managed to actually like organize a chance of like being the hand dealer in poker, Doc goes he's like, when he heard about the word faro, because from my understanding it sounds like he knows that position in terms of like, gambling and the like. And then Wyatt is like, didn't you say that faro is an honest trade? And then Doc has to debunk what Wyatt said. No, I said poker is an honest trade. Holy suckers, buck the Tiger's odds all in the house. While I'm able to pick up certain bits and, like, I don't know, I guess I would say transliterate what is being said, what it sounds like to me, and I know I'm not the only one who's watched it. I know Critical Drinker, shout out to you, sir, has watched it arguably a lot more than I have. Most likely the same case with Orange had reviews. Again, shout out to you as well. But my understanding of that particular exchange is that Doc is telling Wyatt that only a fool would put all of his, chips on the house on a bad hand. That's how it came out to me when I was listening to that exchange. Of course, I could be wrong, but that's how it looked like to me when I was watching this. But overall, the fact that these brothers, the Earp brothers, have like differing opinions in terms of the fact that Tombstone has been kind of like, a bit run down when they learned about the Cowboys, and then they know certain particular ones because of the red sash that they have. They know that, there needs to be some law to not just protect the citizens, but also the town. In addition, when it came to the shootout, way later on in the film, right when Curly Bill tries to have Wyatt and his posse into an ambush, that one was really well, I guess I could say, orchestrated. But this comes way after. It's right after Morgan dies. Virgil survives, but just as as he's about to get shot and they're trying to find Wyatt, I like the sneak attack that he pulls off, and the obvious iconic moment when he spares give me a second, I'm trying to remember the character. I think it was Billy Clanton. Yeah, I think it was Billy Clanton. Is after he shoots the first guy and he's telling him, you tell Curly Bill that I'm coming. And, hell is coming with me. I know I'm just kind of like paraphrasing here, but most fans of that film know that particular moment. And the interesting thing is that this friendship between Wyatt and Doc, it's pretty clear that while they are different in terms of how they live life, Wyatt seems to be kind of like the type who seems sure of himself at first, but over time, after what happens with the Cowboys and him losing his brother, and then the other one's injured to the Cowboys, you can see that he kind of starts to, I don't know if I would say relapse or go back to his old ways, but he seemed sure. It on the surface, it seems like he was sure of what he wanted in life, but as we find out later over time as the film goes on, he isn't as honest with himself as he said he would, because there's a moment where Doc kind of like confronts Wyatt to an extent after the theater performance. And he comes across Josephine Marcus, who is an actress, a stage actress. And what was actually obvious is the fact that they were going over in the theater the play of Henry V. And I hear a few familiar lines from it. But anyway, Doc is asking Wyatt, what are you going to do if she comes up? And Wyatt is trying to downplay it, and he's like, she? And Doc is like, you know damn well who I'm talking about. But, when she shows up, Wyatt says that he's going to ignore her. And that he says that, some people change. And his argument does hold temporarily. The part that I can't seem to figure out is when he said, when Doc calls him an oak. My understanding of that, I'm going to take a wild guess here. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it sounded like to me he's telling Wyatt that, that he's excuse me. It sounded like to Doc, as he was observing Wyatt and what he was doing in that saloon, when Doc called Wyatt an oak, my understanding of that line is he's telling him, okay, so it seems you are firm in your, convictions. However, when Wyatt has that, ride with Josephine with their horses, Wyatt and Josephine have a bit of a philosophical type of discussion. And it's actually pretty interesting with the fact that, Wyatt is kind of like bewildered, curious, and he struggles with trying to, you could say, being honest with, what he wants out of life, because that came almost out of left field for Wyatt. He was not prepared for such an encounter as well as a discussion. One could make the argument that Josephine was trying to be honest with Wyatt. And from Dana Delaney's performance, it definitely looked the case. Not just in terms of the script writing itself, but the way how she carried the character. Now, Powers Booth, who played Curly Bill, that guy, man. I recall seeing that guy in a few films. I just don't remember, but the way how he played that character is just so well done. Especially like from the start of the film. And there's one thing that I find really interesting is the fact that it was Michael Biehn who played Johnny Ringo. When he explains and translates the quote from scripture regarding Revelations, I kept thinking to myself, it's likely going to be referring to somebody, and then they find out later that it's Wyatt Earp. But again, going back to that point where right at the train station, the part before that iconic line, you tell him I'm coming and hell is coming with me. The part where he delivers the line, you wanted to call down the thunder? Well, you got it. And I'm just like, the way how Kurt Russell just delivers that performance, especially right after, right after the Morgan's character gets shot And then Wyatt is just like so caught up in the guilt and the grief. I mean, really good performance by Kurt Russell on that. And, you know, the part where like Josephine's trying to like come by and like comfort him, and she's like, you know, stay away. He's like, can't you see, like, you know, he really loved his brothers. And the fact that, you know, Curly Bill had, you know, his henchmen as well as his lackeys to stir up trouble, and, you know, try to cause some, try to destabilize. That was what I was trying to say. He tries to destabilize the brothers, and he does so to an extent. But overall, when it came down to the last bit, what was really good with Val Kilmer's character of Doc Holliday, I mean, there's some that know the lines better than me, but most would likely cite the most obvious line when he's confronting Ringo and he says, "I'm your Huckleberry." Probably the most quoted line for that character, but there's a bunch of others, I suspect. The moment where Doc is actually mocking the twirling gun showmanship of Ringo early in the film, that part was actually pretty entertaining to watch. And he's just using the cup, the metal cup that he's using for drinking, and yet he's able to roughly, like, you know, like mimic, you know, the whole thing, and then the whole crowd gets a laugh out of it. But anyway, there is a point where towards the end where Doc confronts Ringo, and Ringo thinks that Wyatt Earp is actually, you know, walking towards him. But as soon as Ringo hears that familiar line, "I'll be your Huckleberry," again, he's like, "You again?" And, you know, Doc tells Ringo, "We never got a chance to finish our game." And then Ringo tries to downplay, and he's like, you know, "I was just joking. I wasn't." And then you see the reaction and then the facial expression of Ringo. He's like, they're looking at each other. And as they're circling, he's like, "Oh, he really means it this time." But of course, Doc gets the shot first. And by the time we see Wyatt come in, he's like surprised. He's like, he thought, you know, he lost his friend, but it turns out Doc actually won that one. And then we get towards the end where, as the two are discussing, as Doc is, you know, falling ill from his illnesses, I actually found the moment of them talking and then Wyatt bringing Doc a gift, and we find out it's a book that he wrote about his friend. And then Doc looks at, you know, himself, and we sort of see how his feet are actually you could argue it looks like necrosis just because it shows the bottom of the feet, but it might not have been. All we do know is that he wasn't looking very good. And the interesting thing with the two is Doc pretty much tells him that, you know, there is no normal life, there's just life. I actually find that quote quite fascinating to be honest. I think he was onto something. The others would probably say that, yeah, he had a point. I think so too. But most would probably say I'm likely overthinking it in terms of how simple it is. But one could argue that sometimes the most simple of things is the hardest, and what we perceive as hard is actually simple. Now, towards the end, we get the narration by Sam Elliott's character, Virgil. Yes, his character survives, but overall, this whole story about Wyatt Earp, or at least the Earp family in general, while Hollywood and history do not mix, they do try to, not just give their own interpretation, but try to get a general account of how times were in the West. There's a reason why these are called spaghetti westerns. Now, while I have not watched as much compared to most others, because there are some people who like watching those, I'm just saying. But overall, it is a very good Western film. I liked it. Overall, if I had to give it a rating, I know I was bouncing everywhere regarding this film. Again, it's my first time watching it. If I had to give an overall rating, objectively, I'd give this between a 7 and an 8 out of 10. Subjectively, even though it's my first time watching it, even though I recognize a few familiar faces, okay, maybe more than a few, depends on where I'm looking, but subjectively, even though I was a 90s kid, even though I have passed it numerous times when I was over at those movie rental stores, now that I've watched it for the first time, subjectively, I'd give this film a 9 out of 10. Most would probably be saying I should give it a 10 out of 10. Depending on who you ask, most would probably give it that. I'd have to ask Orange Hat and even Critical Drinker. They'd probably give it a bit higher than I would, but at least I'm being honest about it. With that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more content. Also, I apologize in advance. I know I should have done that Snow White thing a lot sooner, but by now you guys already know that financially it's a flop, and I've heard tons of bits in terms of it being roasted. But I did finish watching the original 1937 animated film. As much as I want to go over the entire thing, that would be way too long. Yes, I'm reading bits from the original story itself, which is approximately 8 pages, as I stated when I was doing that recording. But overall, I will finish it. Then I will get to the second Snow White film, which is the 1997 take that has Sigourney Weaver as well as Sam Neill. Followed by me going over 2 more films with respect to the late Michelle Trachtenberg. The first one being the 1999 Inspector Gadget film. The second being the early 2000s Ice Princess. First one, I've watched it a few times. going to revisit it. The second one, I've only heard of in passing. I know of the title. I did hear a few things from one of my followers about that film. And I will get to that when I do that review. But with that being said, this has been Xavier Pierce, also known as Skyhound, Geek Archivist. Stay safe, stay sane, and as my good friend Orange Hat always says, stay humble. Peace.